The summer heat of 2015 hung heavy over Savannah, Georgia, like a thick blanket that refused to lift. Sarah Thompson stood at the kitchen window of her family's antebellum mansion, watching her 8-year-old son Marcus chase fireflies in the sprawling garden. The ancient live oaks draped in Spanish moss created a magical playground that had enchanted generations of Thompson children. "Marcus, don't go too far," she called out, her voice carrying across the manicured lawn toward the wild section of the property where the old hedge maze stood forgotten. David Thompson looked up from the Sunday paper, adjusting his reading glasses. "He's fine, Sarah. That boy knows every inch of this place better than we do." Sarah smiled, remembering her own childhood adventures in these same gardens. The Thompson estate had been in the family for over 150 years, a testament to old Southern wealth and tradition. The main house, with its towering white columns and wraparound porches, commanded respect from all who passed by Habersham Street. "I'm starting dinner," Sarah announced, turning away from the window. "Can you call him in?" Around 6:30, the kitchen filled with the aroma of fried chicken and fresh cornbread as Sarah prepared Marcus's favorite meal. Outside, the cicadas began their evening chorus, and the Spanish moss swayed gently in the humid breeze. It was a perfect summer evening in the Low Country. At exactly 6:30, David stepped onto the back porch and cupped his hands around his mouth. "Marcus, dinner time, son?" Silence. "Marcus!" he called again, his voice echoing off the ancient brick walls that bordered their property. Sarah appeared beside him, wiping her hands on her apron. "Maybe he's in the maze. You know how sound doesn't carry well back there?" Together they walked across the lawn, past the carefully maintained flower beds, and toward the overgrown section where the hedge maze created a labyrinth of 8-foot-tall boxwood walls. The maze had been planted by David's great-great-grandfather in the 1890s, a whimsical addition to the already impressive grounds. "Marcus!" Sarah's voice carried a note of concern now. "This isn't funny, sweetheart." They entered the maze, following the familiar path that led to the center where an old stone bench sat beneath a massive live oak. The tree was ancient, its trunk easily 6 feet in diameter, its branches spreading like protective arms over the maze's heart. But Marcus wasn't there. "He has to be somewhere," David muttered, his lawyer's mind already organizing a systematic search. "Let's split up. You take the eastern section, I'll check the western gardens." For the next hour, they combed every inch of their 10-acre property. Sarah checked Marcus's favorite hiding spots, the old greenhouse, the potting shed, even the barely accessible space under the front porch. David searched the wooded area that bordered their property, calling Marcus's name until his voice grew hoarse. As darkness fell, panic set in. "We need to call the police," Sarah said, her hands shaking as she dialed 911. Within 30 minutes, their peaceful estate was transformed into a command center. Patrol cars lined Habersham Street, their blue and red lights painting the ancient oaks in ominous colors. Officer Janet Rodriguez, a 15-year veteran of the Savannah Police Department, took control of the scene with calm efficiency. "Tell me about Marcus," she said, settling into the Thompsons' elegant living room with her notepad ready. "Any behavioral changes lately? Problems at school? Anyone who might want to hurt your family?" Sarah and David exchanged glances. "Nothing." Sarah whispered, "He's just a normal 8-year-old boy. Happy, curious, well-behaved." "Any custody issues? Disgruntled employees? Financial problems?" "Officer Rodriguez," David said firmly, "we've lived in this house for 12 years. Marcus was born here. Everyone in the neighborhood knows him. He's never wandered off before." By midnight, search teams with flashlights and K9 units had arrived. The dogs picked up Marcus's scent in the garden, but lost it at the maze's entrance, as if the boy had simply vanished into thin air. The first night was the longest of Sarah and David's lives. They sat on their front porch, watching uniformed officers organize grid searches of their property and the surrounding area. Neighbors brought coffee and food, offering whatever comfort they could. Mrs. Adelaide Forsythe, Their elderly neighbor sat beside Sarah on the porch swing. "That boy is special," she said softly. "I've watched him grow up from my kitchen window. He's going to come home." But as dawn broke over Savannah, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Marcus Thompson was still missing. The investigation that followed was thorough and relentless. Detective Mike Harrison, a specialist in missing children cases, arrived from Atlanta to lead the search. He interviewed every neighbor, every delivery person, every contractor who had worked on the property in the past year. 8-year-old boys don't just disappear, Detective Harrison told the assembled search teams on day 3. Someone saw something. Someone knows something. Volunteers from the community joined the search. The grounds of the Thompson estate and the surrounding properties were searched with military precision. Metal detectors swept every inch of the gardens. Divers explored the ornamental pond and the tidal creek that ran behind the property. The old hedge maze received special attention. Search teams cut new paths through the boxwood, examining every corner, every dead end. They found nothing but old garden tools, a few forgotten toys from Marcus's younger years, and decades of accumulated leaves. The massive live oak at the maze's center was thoroughly examined. Its trunk was solid, its branches too high for a child to climb without help. The ground around its base showed no signs of disturbance. After 2 weeks, the intensive search was scaled back. After a month, Detective Harrison returned to Atlanta with a thick file of dead-end leads and unanswered questions. The case remained open, but active investigation ceased. Sarah and David Thompson were left with their grief, their questions, and their beautiful, empty house. As autumn arrived and the Spanish moss turned silver in the cooler air, the Thompson estate felt like a mausoleum. Sarah couldn't bear to enter Marcus's room. David threw himself into his law practice, working 18-hour days to avoid coming home to the silence. The community hadn't forgotten. Missing person flyers with Marcus's smiling face remained posted throughout Savannah. The reward money, initially $50,000, then raised to $100,000, went unclaimed. Years passed. Sarah and David's marriage couldn't survive the weight of their loss. They divorced quietly in 2018, selling the mansion to a real estate investment company. The property sat empty for 3 years, slowly deteriorating as legal complications prevented its resale. By 2021, the once pristine gardens had become overgrown. The hedge maze, no longer maintained, grew wild and tangled. Weeds pushed through. The carefully laid brick paths and the ornamental pond turned green with algae. The mystery of Marcus Thompson's disappearance became local legend. Savannah was a city comfortable with its ghosts, and Marcus joined the pantheon of lost souls said to wander the historic district. Tour guides would point out the mansion and whisper about the little boy who vanished without a trace. But ghosts don't leave physical evidence, and in the summer of 2024, 9 years after Marcus Thompson disappeared, someone would finally uncover the truth hidden beneath decades of growth and time. Elena Rodriguez had always believed that gardens held secrets. As she stood before the Thompson mansion in June 2024, her practiced eye surveyed the neglected landscape with a mixture of sadness and professional excitement. The Spanish moss hung like tattered curtains from the ancient oaks, and weeds had claimed most of the formal flower beds. "It's going to be a complete restoration," explained James Crawford, the property manager representing the new owners. "The Pemberton Foundation bought it last month. They want to turn it into a historic house museum and event venue." Elena nodded, making notes on her tablet. At 35, she had built a reputation as one of the Southeast's premier landscape restoration specialists. Her company, Southern Garden Revival, had brought dozens of historic properties back to their former glory. "What's the timeline?" she asked, photographing the overgrown maze area. "They want to open to the public by next spring. I know it sounds ambitious, but they're willing to invest whatever it takes." Elena walked toward the maze, pushing through the shoulder-high weeds that had grown over the old paths. The boxwood hedges, once precisely manicured, had grown into an impenetrable thicket nearly 12 feet tall in places. "This is going to be the biggest challenge," she said, gesturing toward the maze. "It'll need to be completely replanted. These hedges are beyond saving. James consulted his notes. The foundation specifically wants the maze restored to its 1890s design. They have the original plans from the Savannah Historical Society. As Elena made her way deeper into the overgrown maze, she felt a strange melancholy. She'd heard about the Thompson boy who had disappeared here 9 years ago. The story had made national news, and even now missing person flyers occasionally appeared around the city. At the maze's center, the ancient live oak stood unchanged, its massive trunk a testament to the decades it had witnessed. Elena placed her hand on the rough bark, imagining all the children who had played in its shade over the generations. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. Elena Rodriguez. Ms. Rodriguez, this is Sarah Mitchell. The voice was hesitant, almost fragile. I used to be Sarah Thompson. I heard you're working on the garden restoration. Elena's breath caught. She recognized the name immediately. Mrs. Mitchell, yes, I'm just beginning the assessment phase. How can I help you? I know this might sound strange, but I wondered if I could meet with you. About the project. There are things about that property, about the gardens, that you should know. They met the following afternoon at a small cafe on Bull Street. Sarah Mitchell looked older than her 42 years. Her once bright eyes, shadowed by grief that time had softened but never erased. She was impeccably dressed, but fragile, like fine china that had been cracked and carefully glued back together. I want you to understand, Sarah began, stirring her untouched coffee, that garden was Marcus's whole world. He knew every plant, every hiding spot, every secret path. When he disappeared, she paused, gathering herself. The investigators were thorough. They searched everywhere. Elena leaned forward. Mrs. Mitchell, I can't imagine what you went through, what you're still going through. People think I'm crazy for caring about what happens to that place now. My ex-husband thinks I should just let it go. But that garden was the last place my son was happy, the last place he was himself. Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out a manila folder. These are photographs from before, the way the gardens looked when Marcus was alive. The maze especially. He loved that maze. Elena studied the photographs. The contrast with the current state was striking. In these images, the maze was a perfect geometric marvel, with precise pathways and carefully maintained hedges. In the center, the great oak provided shade for a stone bench, where a small boy with dark hair and bright eyes smiled at the camera. He's beautiful, Elena said softly. He would have been 17 now, a senior in high school. Sarah's voice broke.
Slightly.
Sometimes I wonder what he would have looked like, what he would have become. They talked for 2 hours. Sarah shared stories about Marcus's love for the garden, his favorite hiding spots, his make-believe games among the flowers. She showed Elena more photographs. Marcus helping plant bulbs, chasing butterflies, reading under the oak tree. I need you to know, Sarah said as they prepared to leave, that whatever you find during the restoration, if you find anything, please call me first, before the police, before anyone else. I've been waiting 9 years for answers, Elena promised, though she couldn't imagine what they might possibly find after so many years and such intensive searching. The restoration began in earnest the following week. Elena's crew of 6 specialists attacked the overgrown gardens with systematic precision. They started with the formal areas closest to the house, clearing decades of neglect and revealing the bones of the original design. The work was therapeutic for Elena. Each cleared bed, each restored pathway, felt like breathing life back into a forgotten paradise. She found herself working longer hours than necessary, staying after her crew had gone home to handweed delicate areas and carefully nurture struggling plants back to health. The maze presented the greatest challenge. The overgrown boxwood had to be removed entirely, root systems and all, to make way for new plantings. Elena decided to tackle this section personally, working with just one assistant, Tommy Valdez, a young landscaper with an artist's eye for garden design. This is going to take weeks, Tommy observed on their first day attacking the maze. "Some of these root systems are massive." Elena nodded, firing up the chainsaw. "The Foundation wants authenticity. We're going to give them the most beautiful maze in Georgia." They worked methodically, section by section, cutting away the overgrown hedges and then using a small excavator to remove the root systems. It was painstaking work, made more difficult by the need to preserve the magnificent oak at the maze's center. As they worked deeper into the maze, Elena found herself thinking, often about Marcus Thompson. The investigation files she'd requested from the police painted the picture of a thorough search, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something had been missed. On a sweltering Thursday afternoon in late July, they reached the center of the maze. The great oak stood before them, its canopy providing blessed shade from the brutal Georgia sun. Elena walked around the tree's base, examining the root system that would need to be worked around during the new planting. "The new irrigation system will need to go deep," she told Tommy, consulting the restoration plans. The original design called for underground water lines throughout the maze. Tommy was already measuring distances and marking locations with spray paint. "How deep do you want to go?" Elena consulted her notes. "The plans call for 18-inch depth. Deep enough to ensure consistent water flow, shallow enough to avoid major root damage." They began digging the following Monday, using a small trenching machine to create precise channels for the new irrigation lines. The work around the oak was particularly delicate, requiring hand digging to avoid damaging the centuries-old root system. Elena was on her hands and knees, carefully excavating around a massive root, when her trowel hit something that wasn't wood or dirt. The sound was different, a soft scraping that made her pause. "Tommy, come look at this." She brushed away more soil, revealing a small patch of faded blue fabric. Her heart began to race as she continued digging, uncovering more textile fragments and what appeared to be a small piece of white rubber. "Is that—" Tommy's voice trailed off. Elena sat back on her heels, her hands trembling slightly. "Feister." The rich Georgia soil, partially preserved by the acidic conditions around the oak's roots, lay the unmistakable remains of a child's sneaker and fragments of clothing. She pulled out her phone with shaking fingers and dialed the number Sarah Mitchell had given her. "Mrs. Mitchell, this is Elena Rodriguez. I need you to come to the property right away, and I think you should call the police." Detective Rachel Kim had investigated hundreds of cases during her 12 years with the Savannah Police Department, but she'd never worked a scene quite like this one. The July sun beat down mercilessly as she supervised the careful excavation around the ancient oak tree, watching as the medical examiner's team worked with archaeological precision to uncover what lay beneath decades of accumulated soil and root growth. Sarah Mitchell sat on a folding chair 20 feet away, her face a mask of controlled anguish. Elena Rodriguez stood beside her, one protective hand on Sarah's shoulder, the other clutching a bottle of water she'd been trying to coax the grieving mother to drink for the past hour. "We're going to take this very slowly," Dr. Patricia Hernandez, the chief medical examiner, explained to the assembled group. "The conditions here, the acidic soil, the root system, the depth, they've created an unusual preservation environment. We want to maintain the integrity of everything we find." Detective Kim nodded, making notes in her waterproof pad. She'd read the original case file twice since Elena's call that morning. The 2015 investigation had been thorough, professional, and ultimately fruitless. Now, 9 years later, they might finally have answers. "Can you explain why this area wasn't searched originally?" she asked James Crawford, the property manager who had remained on site since the discovery. Crawford consulted the thick folder of documents he'd brought from his office. According to the original police reports, this area was searched multiple times, but they were looking for signs of disturbance, freshly dug earth, obvious hiding places. The root system here is so dense and established, it would have looked completely undisturbed in 2015. Elena knelt beside Dr. Hernandez as the medical examiner carefully brushed soil away from what was clearly a small sneaker. "The root growth patterns tell a story," Elena explained. "These oak roots grow slowly but persistently, Over 9 years they would have gradually encased and displaced whatever was here, making it look like natural forest floor. Mrs. Mitchell, Detective Kim approached Sarah gently. I know this is incredibly difficult, but I need to ask you about Marcus's clothing when he disappeared. Do you remember what he was wearing? Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. Blue shorts, his favorite pair with cargo pockets, a white t-shirt with a dinosaur on it, and his new sneakers. White Velcro sneakers we just bought for summer camp. Dr. Hernandez looked up from her work, her expression compassionate but professional. What we're uncovering is consistent with that description. As the afternoon wore on, the careful excavation revealed more pieces of the puzzle. The remains were found in what appeared to be a circular depression, roughly 4 feet in diameter and approximately 8 feet deep. The depression was lined with old brick and mortar, clearly man-made. It's a cistern, Elena realized, studying the construction, an old rainwater collection system. They were common in the 1800s, especially on properties this size. Detective, Kim photographed the brickwork, noting the craftsmanship that spoke of 19th-century construction. Oh, how would something like this have been missed in the original construction? James Crawford was already on his phone with the Savannah Historical Society. After a brief conversation, he turned back to the group with new information. According to their records, there were originally 3 cisterns on the Thompson property, built between 1847 and 1852. 2 were documented and filled in during the 1960s, when the modern plumbing was installed. The third one, he paused, checking his notes. The third one was listed as sealed and covered in 1923, but there's no record of it being properly filled. So it was just covered over? Detective Kim asked. Apparently so, probably with wooden planks and then soil. Over a century of leaf fall, root growth, and natural decomposition would have created what looked like solid ground. Dr. Hernandez had finished her preliminary examination and was carefully transferring everything to evidence containers. Based on what we've found and the position of the remains, this appears to have been an accidental fall. The child would have landed at the bottom of the cistern, and the covering would have collapsed inward, trapping him. Sarah had been silent for the past hour, but now she spoke, her voice stronger than it had been all day. Did he suffer? Dr. Hernandez met her eyes with professional compassion. Based on the positioning and the evidence, I believe the fall would have been fatal very quickly. He wouldn't have suffered. Helena found herself remembering her conversation with Sarah at the cafe, the mother's desperate need for answers after 9 years of uncertainty. Now, finally, she would have them. Not the answers she'd hoped for, but the truth nonetheless. I need to understand the timeline, Detective Kim said, reviewing her notes. Marcus was last seen around 5 p.m. on July 15, 2015. He was found missing at 6:30 p.m. In that hour and a half, he came to the center of the maze, somehow fell through the covering of this cistern, and the covering collapsed on top of him. Elena studied the scene, her landscaper's eye analyzing the geography. The original covering would have been flush with the ground, probably invisible under fallen leaves and natural debris. To an 8-year-old boy, it would have looked like solid ground. But why didn't the search dogs find him? Detective Kim asked. The depth, the brick construction, the sealed environment, Dr. Hernandez explained. The scent wouldn't have carried to the surface, especially after the covering collapsed. And by the time the intensive search began the next morning, any surface traces would have been contaminated by the search teams themselves. Sarah stood up slowly, walking to the edge of the excavation site. She looked down at the brick-lined pit that had held her son's remains for 9 years, her face a mixture of grief and strange relief. He was here the whole time, she said softly. All those years I wondered if he was scared, if he was cold, if someone had hurt him. All those years he was right here, in his favorite place. Elena joined her at the edge of the site. Sarah, I need you to know something. This wasn't anyone's fault. The 2015 investigation was thorough. No one could have known about this cistern. The records were incomplete, the covering was invisible, and the location was impossible to detect without excavation. Detective Kim was already coordinating with the coroner's office and preparing the notification calls that would officially close one of Savannah's most haunting missing person cases. But her attention was also on Sarah Mitchell, the mother, who had waited 9 years for this moment. "Mrs. Mitchell, I know this is overwhelming, but I want you to know that your son's case will finally be closed properly. There will be no more questions, no more uncertainty. You can lay him to rest." Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face for the first time since the discovery. They weren't just tears of grief. They were tears of relief, of a kind of peace she hadn't felt since July 15, 2015. As the sun began to set over Savannah, painting the Spanish moss in shades of gold and amber, the investigation team completed their work. The ancient oak stood witness, as it had for over a century, to both tragedy and resolution. Elena remained at the site after the official vehicles had departed, carefully covering the excavation area and securing the scene for the restoration work that would resume the following week. But first, there would be a funeral. First, Marcus Thompson would finally come home. The next morning, Savannah woke to news headlines that closed a chapter in the city's recent history. Missing child found after 9 years. Accidental death solves. Haunting mystery. But for Sarah Mitchell, David Thompson, and everyone who had loved Marcus, the headlines were secondary to the simple, profound relief of finally knowing the truth. 3 months later, Elena Rodriguez stood in the restored Thompson Garden as the first visitors of the day explored what was now known as the Marcus Thompson Memorial Garden. The transformation was remarkable. The maze had been rebuilt to its 1890s specifications. The flower beds blazed with seasonal color, and the ancient oak at the center stood proudly above a new memorial garden that honored not just Marcus, but all the children who had played in these gardens over the generations. Sarah Mitchell appeared beside her, no longer the fragile woman Elena had first met at the cafe. The resolution of Marcus's case had begun a healing process that, while far from complete, had given her the strength to engage with life again. "It's beautiful," Sarah said, watching a group of schoolchildren explore the maze under their teacher's supervision. He would have loved seeing other kids enjoy it. The memorial itself was simple but profound, a circular garden of white flowers surrounding a bench made from Georgia marble. A bronze plaque read, "In memory of Marcus Thompson, 2007-2015, and all the children who found joy in this garden. May their laughter echo through these paths forever." Elena had designed the memorial garden with careful attention to child safety. The old cistern had been properly filled and sealed, and ground-penetrating radar had located and secured 2 other forgotten cisterns on the property. The city had used the discovery to launch a historic property safety initiative, ensuring that other families would never face the Thompsons' tragedy. "I have something for you," Sarah said, pulling a small package from her purse. "It's not much, but I wanted you to have it." Inside was a simple silver pendant in the shape of an oak leaf. "It was Marcus's," Sarah explained. "He found it in the garden when he was 6, convinced it was a magical treasure. I thought you should have it. You brought him home." Elena fastened the pendant around her neck, feeling the weight of the responsibility it represented. Over the month since the discovery, she had become more than just the garden's designer. She had become the keeper of its story, the bridge between its tragic past and hopeful future. David Thompson chose that moment to arrive for his weekly visit. The divorce had been finalized years ago, but Marcus's discovery had brought the former couple together in their grief and eventually their healing. David looked healthier than he had in years, the haunted expression that had defined him since 2015 finally beginning to fade. "The safety inspection is complete," he told Elena and Sarah. The city found 3 more historic properties with similar risks. They're launching a grant program to help property owners identify and secure old cisterns and wells. This had become David's mission, ensuring that Marcus's death would prevent future tragedies. He had donated his legal services to create the Marcus Thompson Foundation, dedicated to historic property safety and supporting families of missing children. Elena watched the interaction between Sarah and David, noting the gentle care they showed each other. They would never be husband and wife again, but they had found a way to honor their son's memory together. "Mrs. Rodriguez?" a small voice interrupted. Her thoughts, a girl of about 8 with pigtails and a bright summer dress, tugged at Elena's sleeve. "Are you the lady who found the lost boy?" Elena knelt to the child's level, choosing her words carefully. "I'm the lady who helped bring him home to his family. That's different. My mom says he's not lost anymore." "That's right. He's not lost anymore." The child skipped away to rejoin her class, leaving Elena with the profound simplicity of childhood. Understanding. Marcus Thompson was not lost anymore. His family knew where he was, why he had disappeared, and that his last moments had been spent in the place he loved most. As autumn arrived in Savannah, the memorial garden took on new beauty. The white flowers of summer gave way to chrysanthemums and late-blooming roses. The oak tree, which had stood silent sentinel over tragedy for 9 years, now presided over healing and remembrance. Elena often worked in the garden after hours, finding peace in the simple acts of weeding and watering. She had turned down several lucrative projects to remain as the garden's full-time curator, a decision that puzzled her business partners but felt absolutely right to her. On a crisp October evening, as she was deadheading the roses near the memorial bench, she was surprised to see a familiar figure approaching. Officer Janet Rodriguez, no relation, despite the shared surname, had been one of the first responders to Marcus's disappearance in 2015. She was now Captain Rodriguez, having been promoted partly on the strength of her compassionate handling of the Thompson case. I hope you don't mind the intrusion," Captain Rodriguez said, settling onto the memorial bench. "I've been meaning to visit since the garden reopened." "Not at all. I imagine this place holds a lot of memories for you, too." Captain Rodriguez nodded, looking around at the restored maze. "I worked the original case, spent 3 weeks searching these grounds, convinced we'd missed something. Turns out we had, but not in any way we could have anticipated." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the Spanish moss sway in the evening breeze. Finally, Captain Rodriguez spoke again. "I wanted to thank you, not just for finding Marcus, but for how you handled everything. The family, the investigation, this memorial, you gave them something I couldn't. Closure with dignity." Elena fingered the oak leaf pendant at her throat. "I just did what the garden needed. It wanted to tell its story. You know," Captain Rodriguez said, standing to leave, "I've investigated a lot of missing person cases over the years. Most of them don't end with resolution. The families of those children carry that uncertainty forever. What you did here, it matters more than you might realize." After Captain Rodriguez left, Elena remained on the bench as darkness fell over the garden. Solar lights that followed the maze's pathways began to glow softly, creating a magical atmosphere that would have delighted Marcus Thompson. She thought about the journey that had brought her to this place, from a simple landscaping contract to becoming the guardian of a family's healing process. The garden had changed her as much as she had changed it. Her phone chimed with a text message from Sarah. "Thank you for everything. Marcus would have loved what you've created. See you at the anniversary service next month." The anniversary service had been Elena's idea, a celebration of Marcus's life rather than a mourning of his death. The entire Savannah community was invited to share stories, plant flowers, and help ensure that Marcus Thompson's legacy would be one of joy rather than tragedy. As Elena locked the garden gates for the night, she looked back at the ancient oak tree silhouetted against the star-filled sky. Tomorrow would bring new visitors, new children who would laugh and play in the maze, new families who would find peace in the memorial garden. The secret that the garden had kept for 9 years had finally been revealed, not to bring more pain, but to allow healing to begin. In a city famous for its ghosts and mysteries, the Thompson Garden had chosen to give up its secret so that a family could finally rest. Elena drove home through the historic district, past the antebellum mansions and moss-draped squares that made Savannah unique. She had helped write the final chapter of one of the city's most heartbreaking stories, transforming it from a tale of loss into one of love, memory, and the enduring power of the human spirit to find peace even in the darkest circumstances. The Marcus Thompson Memorial Garden would continue to bloom season after season, a living testament to a boy who had found joy in simple things and a family who had never stopped loving him. And in the center of it all, the ancient oak would continue its silent vigil, no longer keeping secrets, but sheltering the memories of all who found sanctuary in its shade.